Welcome to the Colic Experience podcast. In this episode, we delve into bold insights, experimentation, and groundbreaking leadership strategies. We'll explore how structuralist perspectives reveal the hidden power of cultural structures within organizations and how these can sometimes outweigh formal authority. Let's dive in. Ferdinand de Saussure's Course in General Linguistics, first published in 1916, is considered one of the most important works in linguistics. In that book, Saussure laid the foundations for a new way of thinking about language, what later influenced an entire movement known as Structuralism. Although Saussure never used the term structuralism and never saw how his ideas would shape such a powerful intellectual current, the book that bears his name inspired a whole generation of thinkers in linguistics and far beyond. The central idea is that language is a system of agreed-upon conventions, and that words mean what they mean only within that system. According to Saussure, if we want to study language, we need to focus on the structures that shape linguistic meaning. Followers of his approach took this insight and applied it to language and many other domains under the label Structuralism. Instead of directing our attention to individual elements or details, structuralism shifts the gaze toward the underlying framework that governs relationships among elements. When we shift our perspective like this to organizations, most of us first think of the organizational chart, those formal lines and boxes that detail who reports to whom. Every organization has such a structure which goes a long way toward defining how it functions and how information flows within it. This formal structure is based on authority and power. The higher we sit on the organizational chart, the more power and authority we hold to enforce our will on those below. Of course, having power does not mean we must always use it. We can influence in other ways. But the fact that formal authority exists and can be exercised shapes the system's dynamics. That said, the formal organizational structure is public and visible. Everyone knows who reports to whom and people's job titles, and it's not difficult to guess where the formal power lies. However, other kinds of structures operate in an organization, ones that might not be as apparent as the organizational chart. We know this because of the situations that prompt an organization to seek outside support or guidance. A large portion of our consulting work is driven by the fact that something isn't flowing smoothly within the formal structure. If all the data, decisions, and actions ran exactly as planned, there would be no call for help. When certain parts of the system are not working in harmony with the organizational chart, one possibility is that some people need training or replacing. The structuralist perspective suggests that other non-formal structures are at play, pulling different parts of the organization in different directions. We can give a clear example by looking at a union or workers' committee. Unions are a visible power structure within an organization, and their goals might not align with management's. In these cases, management tries to wield its authority, while the union counters with its own power. However, notice that a union is still relatively easy to identify. It's not a secret that it exists or that it has real leverage. Another structure, far less visible but often far more influential, is organizational culture. Culture sets behavioral norms that no one formally decided upon, yet almost everyone follows them. Unlike management or a workers' committee, culture has no physical office, no formal address, and no single decision-maker. It does not rely on any one person. It is simply present in the system, shaping how the organization operates, even though no part of it is spelled out in written procedures. Metaphorically, organizational culture lives in the gaps between the elements of the organizational chart. Its structure is like a network. It connects points of influence in ways that do not necessarily depend on people's official roles. Because culture is abstract, decentralized, and woven into the organization, it can be remarkably powerful. It is less tangible and harder to pin down, which is precisely why it can exert such a strong pull on people's behavior. If we think about organizational culture from a structuralist vantage point, we see it as an additional power structure that shapes how people act and make decisions. If we hope to change something in that culture, or more modestly, to influence it, our focus cannot be only on individuals, teams, or formal processes. We need to concentrate on the relationships among all these elements, which is extremely complex. It requires a language that focuses on relationships rather than tasks. And in our experience, most organizations do not speak that language fluently. That is not the only difficulty. Analyzing organizational culture means we are looking at the non-formal power dynamic, where authority sometimes shifts away from those with formal titles and into the hands of people or groups who might not hold official leadership roles. As a result, this process can be unsettling for senior managers. If they lead the culture change initiative, they might be uncomfortable discovering that the true power in the organization resides elsewhere. We have seen this play out in real life. In one of our recent engagements at a large biotech firm, the executive team asked us to diagnose why their safety protocols weren't being observed. The formal structure showed who was responsible for safety and how instructions were meant to flow, yet protocols weren't followed. As we dug deeper, we discovered that a group of seasoned lab technicians had no managerial titles and held significant social influence. They had unofficially decided that specific protocols were unnecessary, and most staff followed their lead because they were the real authority figures in day-to-day lab work. Management's formal authority said, "Follow the handbook." However, the underlying cultural network had already established a different norm. Only when we helped the formal leaders see how these cultural influencers shaped on-the-ground behaviors were we able to begin shifting the norms around safety. We encountered something similar in a software development organization. There, management struggled to implement a new project management approach that looked perfect on the org chart. Developers and team leads, though, found informal workarounds. They did it their way because that was the cultural norm, and the department's star programmers, who wielded more day-to-day influence than their titles suggested, had little interest in the official process. Formally, authority belonged to the project management office, but culturally, the programmers led the show. Nothing changed until we addressed that gap and recognized that those star programmers were the real focal point of informal power. It is also worth noting that changing organizational culture can be tricky because we are trying to change it from within. An organization attempting to alter its culture is like someone trying to rescue themselves from drowning by pulling on their hair. We are not saying the only solution is to bring an external lifeguard. We believe only the organization can indeed change its culture. However, we must remember that the existing culture will resist the new one from within. That kind of shift is a delicate, lengthy, dialectical process that must be approached honestly about its limitations. In our experience, cultural transformations tend to succeed only to a modest degree, at least if we define success as a complete replacement of the old culture. We often get partial shifts or improved alignment, which can certainly be valuable. However, expecting an organization to reinvent itself overnight is unrealistic. Still, that does not mean we give up. Culture is a powerful structure, just as crucial to consider as the formal org chart, and acknowledging its existence is the first step toward working with it instead of against it. Structuralist thinking teaches us to look at the deeper relational frameworks, not just the visible lines of authority. Realizing there are multiple power structures in which culture plays a central role helps us see our organizations more clearly and offers new ways to guide them toward healthier and more effective operation. And that wraps up today's podcast. where we explored how Ferdinand de Saussure's Structuralism highlights the powerful influence of cultural structures in organizations, often surpassing formal roles and charts. Stay tuned for more updates.